Now, new EU rules will see speed limiting technology made mandatory in all new cars, vans and trucks from Wednesday. All newly launched models sold in EU countries will need to have intelligent speed assistance.
Yes, well, that's ISA, and these systems should be installed as standard according to these new EU rules. And the speed limiting systems use GPS, sat-nav and cameras to identify the legal limit and will warn drivers to slow down if they're going too fast. And if they don't, the car can restrict engine power.
Will they just get out of our lives, please, and out of our cars? The move comes after the European Parliament in 2019 agreed to mandate the tech to combat excessive traffic collisions and injuries on the road. However, the UK government is still to confirm if it will be a requirement here in 2022.
Yes, so where do we stand in terms of having speed limiters in our cars? Well, we're pleased to be joined now by Amanda Stretton, former motorsports racing driver. Thank you for joining us this morning. Look, as I understand it, some of the newer cars in the UK already have this system built into them, and you can actually manually override it anyway. So don't you think this is just the EU? This is just bureaucracy, really, for no reason when people can manually override them?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, it's a tricky one because we know that the vast majority of road accidents that take place are actually caused by speed. So this is a step that's trying to make the roads safer for everybody, because if we can manage people's speed, we can obviously create safer roads. The other thing to really mention about speed is that it's one of the biggest causes, aside from just simple congestion, for congestion on the roads. People travelling too fast, and then it causes these bottlenecks. Everybody slows down, and sometimes, people are very familiar on motorways having a standstill, and there seems to be no apparent reason for it. Speed is generally the contributing factor for that. So this is technology that's designed to sort of keep the roads flowing. It's one more step in the road towards autonomy, but it's definitely been brought in from a safety perspective. Now, as you mentioned, the EU have now mandated that this is going to be law, and all cars are going to be required to have it from Wednesday. I think the idea that the UK is going to, whether or not we legislate for it or against it, I almost think is academic, because it's actually prohibitively expensive for car manufacturers not to put it in cars that are coming to the European market, because it's actually just cheaper if you've got a production line running, just to keep that production line sort of uniform and all the same bits put on. So I actually suspect most cars being sold in the UK will have it, whether or not it's mandated or not.
That's fascinating, Amanda. I think that's such an interesting insight, that we might feel that it isn't coming here, but eventually it inevitably will, because we won't have a choice. The other part of this, I imagine, therefore, is that the government have to establish the technology on our roads to slow us down and slam on our brakes if we're not doing it. That doesn't sound like the kind of thing that could happen overnight, is it?
Well, first of all, this technology isn't going to slam on the brakes. So what's going to happen with this is it will give you either a visual warning on your dashboard, or perhaps what's known as a haptic warning, where the steering wheel might vibrate. So you're going to be alerted to this. As you say, it is possible to switch it off as well. So if, for example, you're trying to overtake another car, for example, and you're therefore accelerating and momentarily breaking the speed limit, what it isn't going to do is sort of stop you as you've pulled out into maybe the oncoming traffic lane. You can just override it like that. So it's not actually going to be slamming on the brakes, but it is using technology that's already in existence. So as you say, GPS and sat-nav, we know what the rules are. We know what the rules are regulated. This technology has been available in black boxes for many years, where drivers are monitored and insurance companies know what roads they're on and what the speed limit is. The other thing that is being used now are the cameras. So the cameras, forward-facing cameras in cars, can actually read things like variable speed limits on motorways, on the smart motorways that we're seeing. And again, even though it knows that you're on the M1 and the M1 may be 70 miles an hour, you may be in a 50 or even a 40, and it will again tell you.
I mean, at the very height of this technology, and as you say, it isn't here yet, it might be, but in the EU, in some areas, and some particular cars, they will be slowed down, won't they? There is the technology exists that the car will be slowed down by something outside of that vehicle.
That's right. So what it does is it actually restricts the engine power. So as you try to accelerate, it will restrict the power and it won't. However, if you firmly put your foot on the accelerator, it will automatically override. So again, safety has to be taken into account here, and it isn't just going to simply abandon you. But I think the other thing that actually I feel quite strongly about is the cost implication of this, because implementing new technology, actually a lot of this technology is already available in certainly the mid to high end cars that are being sold. So actually this isn't really new. What is new is it coming into the sort of entry level and the lower part of the market. People are already feeling, with the story you've just had about fuel prices, motoring, getting about, and it's an essential part of our lives, getting about, is simply becoming more and more expensive. And for people buying new cars, this is just going to be an added cost, particularly at that bottom end of the market. And it's not just the cost at purchase, it's also repairs, insurance, all of it is going to have a knock-on effect. Because if you just have a little prang, dent your bumper, but you've actually damaged your forward-facing cameras, your bumper is going to cost an awful lot more to repair than just a simple touch-up and paint job. So this has a knock-on effect all the way through the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I do wonder, though, I mean, it's all well and good, all this technology sort of trying to make us drive better, but the amount of drivers I see who, not necessarily because of speed, but who nearly cause accidents just because they're terrible drivers, they don't stay in their own lane, they're just not following the rules, they're not looking. I mean, shouldn't we be focusing on that aspect of things to make our roads safer? Because I see so many terrible drivers who should not have a driving licence.
That's a difficult one to legislate about, because you're essentially trying to ban people who you don't consider to be good drivers.
Well,
but I know what you mean.
Stricter driving test, maybe. Maybe that's why we have so many accidents.
I just wonder whether there should be, Amanda, a regular... As much as I hate the fact that I'm saying this, 'cause it's not something I'd want to do myself, but whether we should have to have regular tests every few years to see if you recognise, because the street signs are changing every blimmin' day on my street. I'm never quite sure what anything means anymore. And whether we should be refreshing. When people arrive here, maybe they've got their licence in a different country, should they have to sit the British driving test? I kind of think we probably should be starting there.
Well, some of that is already in place. So if you are a foreign national outside of the EU, you can drive in the UK for a year, but then you will have to take a British driving test. So some of that is already in place. The other point about regular driving tests, I mean, you're right. When smart motorways were first introduced, people didn't really understand whether the speed limit on the smart motorway was actually mandatory or advisory. Yeah. And a huge number of people were getting fines. And that's because well over 3/4 of the drivers on our roads actually passed their test and began driving before these things ever came in. And it was never really clearly communicated. So there is a big argument that, certainly communication should be made a lot better when changes to our roads are made. But all of this is actually a step in the direction of autonomy. And that's another hugely contentious issue. People either love it or hate it. The biggest problem with autonomy is it's going to make our roads safe. It's going to make our roads run much smoother. But not everybody is going to want to do it.
But what about you as a racing driver? I was so pleased when they said you were doing this item today, because not only am I familiar with your work as a racing driver, but I was just really interested to know that you love driving a car. You don't want the government's camera slowing you down, Amanda Stretton. You want to feel that car. You want to be in charge of your vehicle, do you not?
I do. You're absolutely right. And that is the big problem, because when we look at autonomy, what's almost impossible is to have autonomous cars on the road at the same time as manually, as in human-driven cars.
With capable drivers.
Yes, please.
So it's a really difficult one. And the only logical solution is that we have a sort of 2-lane system. So there will be one lane or half a motorway for autonomous vehicles and the other half. Because, of course, you can't just say, right, from now on, there are going to be no manually driven or human-driven cars anymore. That's just simply not going to be practical. And there are also plenty of applications.
I
where
hope
it's
you're
just
right.
not going to be practical
I
either.
hope you're right. And actually, the number of people, I hate the idea of self-driving cars and autonomous vehicles, but then I see how many people are driving down the motorway, texting and looking at their phones, literally in the fast lane of the motorway. In the fast lane of the motorway, like scrolling through Twitter.
And then they'll start swerving because they're not really keeping
and then I see those idiots and I think, you know what, some people need self-driving cars. Because we're not all as good at driving as Amanda Stretton. Yeah. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's lovely to see you. Former motorsports racing driver and superb motoring journalist, Amanda Stretton.